Nah, it's fine. Okay, so we're going to get started with exercise 127. And we're going to do 127 today. Then next Monday, we'll do 128, which will be the plan view. Then we'll do portfolios right before Thanksgiving. Remember that we do technically have class on Wednesday of Thanksgiving week, right? Next week is Thanksgiving week. We have class on Wednesday, like normal. You get Thursday off. I think you get Thursday and Friday off. But you guys don't have classes on Friday anyway, right? No, you don't get Wednesday. Trust me. If you got it off, I wouldn't be here. No, I have to be here. So, anyway, so we will do portfolios on Wednesday of next week. Then when we come back after Thanksgiving, we'll do the elevations plans, we'll do the sections, and then we'll do the perspectives that week when we come back. December 11th. Portfolios due December 11th, which is a Monday. And it gets it done early in finals week, so you don't have to stress out about my class anymore. You can worry about physics or whatever else you're doing, right? So we'll talk about printing the portfolios when it gets a little bit closer, but you can do a variety of things. You can take it somewhere and have it printed. And when I bring the stack of portfolios in for you guys to review and look at, I'll bring them back in on that Wednesday. I've asked people to put sticky notes or little labels in the backs that say where it was printed and how much it costs, so you can get a sense. I used to not do that, and people would ask me, where did this person have it printed? It's like, I have no idea. So now most of them have stickers in the back, so you can see where they were printed. Some people will just print it here and bind it themselves. So you can do it. There's kind of a broad spectrum of how it can be done. It can be more or less successful depending on what your portfolio looks like and what kind of color it is and what kind of paper you use. I mean, there's a lot of differences that can happen. And the best way to talk about that is to look through the examples, and I'll bring those in and we'll look at them. You're still a little ways off from having to print it, so we've got some time. Okay, so for exercise 127, we're going to be trying to do an elevation view of your building. And so obviously there are 4 elevation views in your building. We're only going to do one. If you choose to include this as part of your assignment 106, remember you're picking 3 of elevation, plan, section, and perspective. You're picking 3 of those 4 to turn in. If you choose to do the elevation view, you are only doing 1 elevation. So I don't want you to get confused and think you have to do all 4 elevations. You're just picking 1 elevation for today to work on. The goal here, and through the next several lectures, is how do we take something from SketchUp, where you've worked hard in getting a 3D model, and make it into some kind of a drawing that represents the building? And so the primary views that we're talking about are obviously elevation, plan, section, and perspective. The most common long-term that you're going to be doing out of a 3D model is probably a perspective view, but it's still worth at least talking through how you create an elevation view and a plan view, etc. Especially if you spend a lot of time and created a detailed model. There's no reason not to use that to your advantage. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my SketchUp file to start. And I probably should have already had it open, but bear with me for a second while we open it up. Okay, so I have my SketchUp model. I only modeled the front side here because that's the elevation that I'm going to be working with. The back side is not done, so you get what you get. So anyway, I'm going to start setting up an elevation view of this particular building. So obviously I can get in close and I could say, okay, well that's kind of like an elevation view of this building. Let me switch the styles here into the hidden line, just so that you can see it a little bit easier there. Okay, so there's the hidden line view of this. But notice that this is technically still in perspective. See how these lines inside the building recede back? Likewise, that's receding back toward a point in the center. This isn't an elevation view. This is still a perspective view. So I need to change the view from perspective into parallel projection. So I'm going to go to the camera menu, and I'm going to come down here to parallel projection instead of perspective. And when that switches, you'll see your building, rather than being in where the lines recede, everything is straight. Does that make sense? I still need to get this lined up so that it's perfectly in elevation view. And to do that, I could keep moving it and moving it and moving it. That's obviously close. But it's faster if I go up to my camera and I go to standard views and I pick one of the standard views. It's probably the front. Nope, it's the back. Standard views, we'll go front. No, sorry, back. There it is. So there's the view that I want. And when I'm in this view, it makes it much easier to have it perfectly centered in elevation. So there's my elevation view of this side. Just like I did before, I want to make sure that I save this scene so that I can reuse it over and over and over again. And so you see up at the top, I have a bunch of scenes that have already been set from previous classes. I'm going to go over to my scenes window here. And remember, if you're not seeing this, you can go to the window default tray and then turn on scenes. And I'm going to go ahead and save this scene. And this scene is going to be front. What is this? This is the south-north elevation. Okay, so I give it a little name so that we know that it's named. There it is. The advantage here is, remember, I can always return back to this view. And so it's important that we keep the same view when we do all of our exports for this. So that's saved as a scene. I want to get the original line drawing out, but I want to turn off things like the axes. I don't need the red and the blue lines. All of that can go away. So I'll go to the View menu here, and I'm going to turn off my section cuts. I'm going to go to View. I'm going to turn off my axes. I'm going to go and turn off my guides so that all I have is this very basic line drawing. Once I have the line drawing, I'm going to go ahead and export this line drawing. I'll go to File, Export 2D Graphic. We're going to save this as a JPEG. And I need to put it into today's folder. All right, this is and I'm going to add underscore lines to that so I can keep track. This is just the lines. I'm going to click on my options first. I'm going to make sure that my view size is rather large. And in this case, I chose 5,000 pixels wide. The height is whatever it is. I'm making sure that I'm on best quality. I'll say OK. And then I'll go ahead and click on Export. So it then exports my line drawing. At this point, I'm going to go through the rest of the export options. And we've been through this strategy before. You guys did it with the Francis Ching Cube House. I'm going to go into my styles here. I'm going to move over to the Edit tab. And I'm going to go to the Faces, or the Face setting. And I'll turn on X-ray. You don't really see much in the elevation view. There's a little bit there. I'll go ahead and export this anyway. Export 2D graphic. And this is going to be X-ray. Export. Now the next one is I'm going to turn on the shadows. I'm going to skip the guides because the guides didn't do much for me. So I say that in the tutorial that you should do one for guides. I didn't use guides, so it's kind of moot point. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the shadows. So I go to View and then Shadows. If I'm not seeing anything, I may have to go and adjust the time of day. So let me go into Shadows here and see if I can get something to show, did it not? How convenient. I'm getting no shadows. There you go. I was on X-ray still. I had to turn off X-ray. So X-ray's off. Now I can work with my shadows. And I'm going to adjust with the hope of getting a shadow that looks good on my particular building. Now this is a north elevation, so all of the overhangs are giving me a lot of deep shadows. So that's to be expected. I'm not going to get too much. But I'm adjusting the time of day and or the time of year to get the shadow the way I want it to. I'll call that a good shadow. But remember, I don't want the lines exported with the shadows. I just want the shadows. So I'm going to go back to my styles here, and I'm going to go to my edge settings, and I'm going to turn off edges so that I end up with just the shadows being exported. So this is only the shadows. I'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic, and this would be shadows. And I'll export. Remember, I haven't changed the view at all. It's exactly the same view, and that way they'll line up when I bring them into Photoshop. It's really important not to change that. So we'll go ahead and turn those edges back on now. We can turn the shadows off. I'll uncheck the shadows. And now I'm going to go into my Sketchy Edges style, and I'm going to pick a few as part of my export. The pen gray was a good one, if I can find it. Of course, I can't find it. Remember, with any one of these, if you find one that you like and you feel like that's a good one for you, you can do that export as well. There's the pen gray. There we go. I'm going to, once again, turn off the section cuts, the section planes, the guides, so that I'm back to just a line drawing. This is the pen gray, so I'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic. And I'll call this pen, and I'll click export. Feel free to experiment if you want to try a different look. There's nothing wrong with that. I've also found that the airbrush with endpoints works nice, even though it looks heavy here. Once again, I have to turn off the section cuts, the section planes, and the guides. So I'm down to here. This is airbrush. I'll go to File, Export, 2D Graphic, and I will add airbrush to that one. So now I've gone through and I've created all the exports that I need as part of my, my design here. Now it's time to bring those over into Photoshop and stack them up. So I'm going to go ahead and close off SketchUp for now. I can always come back. I saved the view. If I need a new export, I can do that. And I'm going to go ahead and open the first image in Photoshop. So let me open up Photoshop here. And I'll go to File and then Open. And I'll go to today's folder. And I'll take the lines first. There's the lines. And I'll say Open. Now, with all of these, I know it's a little hard for you guys to see this because it's a little faint. But with all of these, remember, I want my background unlocked. So I'll right-click and say Layer from Background. But I also want to name this. So this is my lines. And for your purposes, I'm actually going to duplicate the lines and change it to multiply just so that they show up a little darker on the screen. You don't have to do that. I'm just doing it so that you guys can see it a little bit better. And I'll call this one Lines 2. Then I'm going to bring in the other drawings. So I'll go to File and then Place. And I'll bring in each of the rest of these. So we'll start with the X-ray. I'll place that in. I'll go to File and then Place, and I'll drop in the pen. Yes, you will have to select the multiply every time. Here's the shadows. And the last one was the airbrush. There we go. So on each and every one of these, after I've finished placing them in, I'm going to take the layer and change it to be multiply. And each time that I do that, we'll see through the white part of the image to the dark part of the image. So even that by itself, you guys can see the building really well. But I have control, just like I did with the Francis Ching, I have control of individual parts of the building. So let me go ahead and turn all of these off for just a second, and I'll work with just the lines layer there. The first thing that I need to do in an elevation is I need to establish where the ground is in the elevation. So I need to draw in where that ground plane is going to be. So I'm going to create a new layer. So I'll click on the new layer button here. It's going to be at the very top of the layer stack, which is where I want it to be. I'm going to rename that to be ground. And then I am actually going to paint in where the ground should be. You can do this using just your brush tool. I tend to use a lasso tool to start, just to make a selection, because this lasso tool allows us to have a little bit of undulation as we go along. So I'm going to move my way along here, and then I'll eventually drag all the way around, which makes a selection. I dipped a little bit by accident below the bottom of my building. I can add to the selection by holding down Shift. Notice that the lasso adds a little plus sign next to it, which means I'm adding to it. And I can come back in and say, you know what, I wanted to include a little bit more of that part there. Maybe a little bit more right in there. So I'm just adding to the selection. If I press Control 0 to see everything, now I'm going to paint in what I want this ground to look like. And there's a couple different strategies for the ground. I could start with a dark gray or a black, or I could do the inverse where the ground is white. It depends on whether you have a colored sky background or not. So I'll end up showing you both as options. I'm going to start by painting this in black. It ends up being a little easier to see initially in black. So let me pick black as my foreground color. So there's black as my foreground color. I'm going to use the paintbrush tool right here. Right now my brush is really tiny, so let's make that brush size go up a bit. Remember, I could also use the bracket keys on my keyboard to make that brush go up a bit. And then I'm going to paint in black that ground. The advantage of doing it as black is, remember, I can always do an adjustment on top of that and skew it towards gray. I can lighten that after the fact. And I can again show you that as we go forward. So that's nice. I have a little bit of what the ground would be like. And again, I interpreted where the ground would be a little bit. It's covering up the bottom of my building rather nicely. But it would be nice if there was a little bit more to the edge. And I'm going to use a grass brush using a clone stamp to fill in that edge so that it's a little bit softer against the front of the building. So let me zoom in a bit. And I'm still working on that ground layer over here. I'm going to go to my clone stamp tool. And it's important you use the clone stamp tool, not the brush tool. I'll use clone stamp. And I'm going to make my brush be the grass brush, which is number 134 here. It's possible that I'll have to adjust the size of the brush. I'm going to go ahead and hold down the Alt key, the Control key, the Alt key, it's the Alt key, to copy from here, and I'm going to move up toward the edge. So we can see my brush now as I get a little bit closer. Yeah, it's about right in its size. And we'll start filling in the grass along that edge. Remember, you use spacebar to pan. As I get toward the edge here, I may have to reset where I'm copying from. This is all black, so it's easy to copy from. I'll copy from a little bit further over so I can go right off the edge there. Then I'll work my way over a little bit more. I'll reset. I'll hold down Alt to copy from, and we'll keep working right in here.
Are you doing copy from instead of just black?
I'm doing a clone stamp because that's copying the exact color. If I did a regular brush, I'll show you this. If I did a regular brush with the grass brush here, when I went to paint it, you'd end up with these varying colors. That's how the grass brush works, because it's trying to make it look like, if you pick green, it would look a little bit more. I'm picking, the colors that I have are black and gray. If I pick greens, it would try to create fake grass from those greens. I don't want that variance in colors, so that's where the clone stamp comes in, which allows me to copy an exact color. So I'm only working with black, and I'm copying that black in. One other thing I should point out while I'm finishing up this is if you watch the videos from previous semesters, it's entirely possible that I will do these steps in different order. It just happens to be this is the order I'm going in today. It doesn't really matter what order you do the steps in because you're going to end up with the same result. So let me continue working my way along here. Remember, as I get to the end, see there how my copy from ran out of space? So I got a hard line right there on the edge. I need to come back, copy from over here, and finish off that particular section. OK, so now if I press Control-0 and we look at this, we see that I have a nice, strong ground presented for me, which is obviously the idea. I did not change the ground to be a multiply layer. It's just a normal layer so that it's on top of every other layer, and I can hide stuff behind the ground. So when I go to put a sky in, for example, I can hide the sky behind the ground. So the next piece of this is to put some kind of background as part of this image. So I need to actually go find some kind of a background image. Now, if you were actually doing this project, you would go to the site and you could take your own images, which would certainly help. For our purposes, we have to find one online. So I'm going to do a Creative Commons search in Flickr for Yosemite. And Yosemite Meadow or Valley or something like that is not a bad place to start. Remember, a lot of the work in doing this is finding the right image and figuring out where the right image belongs. Something like this, while it's a really beautiful image, doesn't work for my elevation. There's a building in the background. There's a fence that's randomly through the center. If I put this behind my building, it would look funny. The scale's wrong. So I need to be selective about where I'm picking and what's going to show up in my particular view. This image would work just fine. A lot of times when I'm doing this, I would go through and just open them in new tabs as I go through, as I look through a couple pages of images, trying to find which one would work rather nicely. In our context, I can pay a little bit of attention to my shadows, which is not a bad idea. So if I look here and I look at my shadows, where's my shadows? I should have renamed these layers. There's my shadows. I've got light coming. The sun would be a little bit behind the building over here, shining down. As I'm looking through my images, it would be helpful to kind of have a general understanding. This image, for example, the shadow's coming from the opposite side. I could flip the image. That would work. But it's good to be a little bit aware of that sort of thing. When we get to the perspective, it'll be far more critical. So this one, for example, does have the shadows coming from the right direction. So that one might not be a bad strategy. I'm going to look through a few more here. One of these ought to work. So where was the one? OK, so this one had the shadows coming from approximately the right direction. So we'll see how this one works. This obviously isn't exactly the site. I'm picking something that's close. So let me go ahead and download this. Oh, the size is really bad here. It's too small for me. So let me move on to a different one. Let's see what the size of this one is. This size is pretty decent. Okay. In this particular view, it's going to be a little bit tricky because this is looking down valley slightly. And I've got a little bit of foreground grass. So all of that I have to make sure I can hide. So I'm going to give this one a shot, and we'll see if it ends up working out for me. It may not. And that's one of the things that you have to be aware of when you're doing this, is sometimes you'll put an image in, and it might not really work. You need to try a different image. So OK, so I've downloaded that one. Let me go ahead and copy it into my folder for today. Let me paste it. Here we go. I'll jump back to Photoshop, and I'm going to bring that image in. So I'll go to File and then Place. There's my image. Let me zoom out just a little bit. I'm going to have to make it a little bit bigger. So I'll hold down Shift to keep the image in proportion, like so. I also want that layer to be below the ground layer. So I'll go ahead and commit to the scale, and then I'll make sure that it's below the ground. And then I need to work with the image to figure out where it belongs as I'm looking toward this particular piece. So maybe somewhere like that, it might work. We'll give it a shot and see. It may feel a little awkward because it's looking down. So once I have this in place, I need to go in and find my building again. So let me turn everything off. Let me turn the ground off so that I'm back to just my building. I'm going to select, using the magic wand, oops, make sure I'm on my lines layer here, the background. So there's the background. I have one piece of the building where I can see through. This entry here, I can see through the entry. So I have to make sure I include that piece in the background. So I have everything here selected. If I go back to the background image here, I can do two things. One, I could just delete the inside part out of the background image, or I could create a mask, one or the other. So I have the selection already made, so I'll go ahead and create a layer mask on that, which obviously masks off that part of the background image for me. Now if I were to turn back on my ground, we can see what it looks like with the building in its context. Okay? To me, it's not quite right. The perspective just isn't working for me. Okay? And this is where you have to do these kinds of edits. You have to decide, is it working, is it not working? So I'm going to try a different background image and see if I like it better. So let me come back over here and try this one. I think this one will work a little bit nicer. So let me go ahead and download this one in its full size. And let me copy it. There it is. I'll come back to Photoshop. I'll go to File and then Place, and I'll bring in that other image. This one already feels better. Make that a little bit bigger. Make that a little bit bigger like that. I'll commit to it. I can take my mask. I can hold down Alt, and I can copy the mask from one layer to the other because I already created the mask. And we can see what it looks like. Maybe before I do that, I'm going to make a little adjustment and bring that down ever so slightly. More about like that. A little bit higher. About like that, I think. Then I'll hold down Alt and copy this. Like that. So now we're seeing the elevation in context with the building and the ground. Okay, this starts to feel better. It's probably because the grass in this is about the right length. It's starting to feel like it belongs as part of the elevation view. So now I have that established and set up. I have the background. Remember that I can choose to fade the background or increase the transparency in the background. If it's oversaturated, I could turn the background to black and white. I have a lot of flexibility with what happens to the background. For right now, I'm going to leave it in color and then make an evaluation a little bit later on. So the next piece in this is I have to start to distinguish what's happening to the windows. And I think the next place that would be appropriate would be to work on the windows. So let me zoom in here a little bit. And I'd like to put some kind of a sky reflection into those windows. So first off, I need some kind of a background cloud scape or something to work from. So let me do a Creative Commons search for high cloud sky. I don't want too puffy of clouds. I want If you're a cloud expert, you probably could type in the right type of clouds, but I'm not a cloud expert. Something like that might work. So I'll go ahead and download this image. Copy it. And I'm going to put it into today's folder. And now I need to drop that image in to all the windows of my building. So if I switch to the lines layer, I can then use the magic wand, and I can go through and I can select, I'm holding down Shift right now, all the windows that are in my building. Okay, so I have all the windows selected. I'll go to File and then Place, and I'll drop in the sky. Make that a little bit bigger. Like that, or so. And then I need to make a mask on that layer for all of the windows. I shouldn't have made my selection yet. Sorry. I made that a little bit early. Go back to my lines. Quickly select those windows again. All right, I'll go to my sky. I'll click on the Add Layer Mask so that we have that cut out for the windows. Now, these windows are appearing a little bit too dark, I think, in context for the lightness of the sky and the general exposure, so I need to make an adjustment for that. So let me add an adjustment layer. I'm going to go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and let's do a Hue and Saturation Adjustment. So here's my Hue and Saturation Adjustment. I'm just going to drop the saturation down so that these get a little bit less saturation. They're not quite so blue. They look a lot bluer on there than they do here. So I've done that. I'm going to tie it just to the image. So Control-Alt-G to tie those two things together. I could also make them a little bit lighter so that they're not so overpowering. So maybe something like that is a reasonable compromise. It's amazing how different the projector looks than my screen. Anyway, if you're watching this afterward, I apologize that it looks so bad here. I'm doing adjustments based on what you guys are seeing on the projector. OK, so now I have those set up. Now I could go through and I could continue on with this collage. I could add concrete, for example, to my building. So I could go find some concrete. Let me look again in Creative Commons Search here. I'm going to do board form concrete, maybe. Concrete texture. Terrible. Sometimes it's about what are you searching for. Mm-hmm. OK, I'll do this one. That's fine. So let me go ahead and download that. This looks like a tiling texture. It looks like I might have gotten lucky. I could obviously make my own tiling texture. We talked about that earlier in the semester. Let me copy this, and let me drop it into today's folder. There it is. Now I'll go back into Photoshop, and I'm going to place that in as part of this. Now I have to have a general understanding of where the walls change. I could do concrete all the way across. The problem is there's different depths. So in some capacity, I'm going to have to judge what those depths are. Let me go ahead and go to File and then Place. I'll drop that piece of concrete in. Definitely too big, so let's get the scale down appropriately. So maybe about like that will work. I'm going to move this over so that it's right about there. I'll commit to it. Now I need lots of these. So I'll go ahead and make a selection around, doesn't have to be accurate, just around that object. And I will Control C to copy, Control V will allow me to paste it, and then I can use my Move tool to start to line these pieces up. So I'm just Control V. Turn that off so you can see it a little bit better. And I'm just covering up my building. This is it's slightly different commands, but it's essentially the same idea.
And you're not trying to make bigger pieces in Photoshop.
No, I'm just tiling these together. Now, this was a tiling texture, so they seamlessly go together, which is convenient for me. But you guys don't need to sit here and watch me make it a tiling texture first. So there's a couple little pieces down here that didn't quite get covered. Let me turn off the ground for a second so we can see them. Bless you. Okay, I think that covers it. So now that I have all of those, look at how many layers it created when I did that. So that's a mess. So I'm going to take this layer from layer 26. I'll hold down Shift to the layer where I brought in the concrete to begin with. And then I'll go up to Layer, Merge. Hold on a second. Where is it? Merge Layers, which will merge all of those layers into one layer, which is quite convenient. I'm going to rename that to be Concrete. And then we'll turn off everything. I'll get back to my lines, and I need to use the magic wand to select the pieces that are concrete. So I'll take that, plus this, plus this, plus that, plus that. So I've created those. I'll move back up to the concrete layer, turn it on, and then I'll create a layer mask so that the concrete falls where it needs to fall. I can turn back on the ground to make sure I've covered it. Looks like I missed a little bit in there, but you guys get the idea, certainly. Now, the color is probably too strong, so I may need to do something to lighten it. Let me go ahead and add an adjustment layer on that. So let me go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer. I'm going to do a levels adjustment on it. And I'm going to tie that levels to the concrete, Control-Alt-G. So I'm just on the concrete. And I'm going to change the color to be a little bit lighter. Something like that. So I'm making these modifications as I go along. I could then turn back on the windows so we could see with their adjustment layer on it as well. And then I could turn on the background to see what it looks like with the background. So the rest of this probably needs a little bit more too. It probably needs some wood texture or something to identify those. This wall in here really is supposed to have a door. So let me go back and I'll just fill that in with concrete for right now. This is the advantage, of course. I can come back to my layer mask. I can select, let me select it right there. I'll go back to my concrete layer mask and I will paint, not with the grass brush, with a regular brush. With white, so that I get that particular piece back in. Like that. So I'm layering up these pieces. So at this point, it's time to start playing around with my other exports from SketchUp. So that was my airbrush. I'm going to turn that one on. I don't think the pen is dark enough. I don't think I'm going to worry about the X-ray, but I do want to look at the shadows. and how the shadows are falling on the building. So they might be a little bit strong, so I may need to adjust the overall strength of those. Let me rename this to just be shadows. And I can, once again, I can either use the dodge and burn tools, or I could go in and use an adjustment layer. We go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer. I'm again going to do Levels. Control-Alt-G ties that to just the shadows. And we'll lighten those up just a bit. So they're still there, but they're not quite as overpowering as they were. So maybe about like that. So you can see how I'm starting to build up what this elevation view looks like. For me, the background is still dominating this a little bit too much in the overall elevation. So I want to tone that down just a bit. So I can do this in two ways. Obviously, I could adjust this particular background and drop the transparency down. So I could take this, I could drop it down like that. That helps. Or I could also fade this so that it goes to more transparent. And this is one of the things that you'll learn as you start to assemble these on a bigger board. We're not going to do it for this class, but you'll end up doing it in your careers as a design student. And that is, do you want your view to be framed out such that it has a border on all four sides? Or do you want it to bleed into the next drawings? So if I wanted this to be able to bleed into the next drawings a little bit better, instead of having this sharp top edge, I could bleed this out into transparent or into white. So that's what I'm going to do on the background. Let me rename this to be background. You notice that I'm constantly renaming layers to keep myself organized so I know what's on what layer. So in this context, I need to change the mask that's on this layer. So let me turn off everything else. So we're just looking at this particular layer. Let me zoom out a little bit, like that. I need to work on just the part of the image that's selected here. So I'm going to use the magic wand tool, and I'm going to make sure that it's not going to let me do it that way. Let me go back to my lines. I need to make a selection here so that I have just the background selected. So I have just the background selected. I'll move back up to my background layer like this. And I want to, on the mask, I want to apply a gradient from black at the top to white, coming down a little bit here, so that the top of this image starts to fade away. And I'll do that using the gradient tool, if I can find it. I think it's underneath, yeah, it's underneath the paint bucket tool. I'll use the gradient tool. I have black and white as my two colors. I want black as the foreground, white as the background. I'll start right up here at the very top, and I'll draw a line, and this line represents the transition from white to black, or from black to white. So wherever I stop my line is where it becomes not fully solid, and where I start is fully transparent. So in this case, you may take a few tries at figuring out how far down the transparency really goes. You may find that you want it to go a lot further down. It's going to depend a little bit. So maybe about like that, maybe. Something like that. It looks more extreme here because it's on the checkerboard pattern. When it goes into the regular background, it won't matter quite as much. So let me turn on everything else so that you guys can see it with the rest of the stuff on, except I'm not doing the pen or the X-ray. And so once everything else is back on now, you can start to see that this just fades out into the top. The other thing that can help this not feel so locked in a frame is, instead of having the black ground, I could have this as white ground instead. So to do that, I'm just going to take the ground, and I'm going to apply an adjustment layer to that. Let me go to New Adjustment Layer. Let me do a Levels adjustment on that. Remember, I'm going to tie the two together. Control-Alt-G ties this to the ground layer. And I'll adjust my slider. Oh, really? Are you not going to do it for me? How nice, right? There we go. Wrong slider. To white. So I just took the black background and I made the black background white. And so now if we look at this, this is a much lighter drawing. It doesn't have the big heavy drawing below it. So this still works because this is a nice sharp white contrast. It still works to tell us that's the ground. It's just stylistically different. I could also pick any value in between. This is why I made it, sorry, wrong. There you go. I can also pick any value in between, which is why I made it, wrong one. It's the black one. There we go. So I could decide, would I rather have it gray or do I want it all the way to black? Do I want it a little bit lighter? You could play with this. Okay, so in this context, I'm going to leave it white. And so now this is showing with a white ground and a semi-transparent sky. I still could convert this background image into black and white if I wanted it to go away a little bit further. So I could add, let me go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer. And we'll do a channel mixer. I'm going to tie Control-Alt-G, and I'm going to switch the background into black and white. And now the only thing that's popping out in this is just the windows. And so you see that as I'm going through these, I'm making decisions about what looks better and what looks worse. And so you may find that, no, you know what, I really liked it when it was a color background. Okay? Maybe you really like it when it's a black and white background. You have to figure out what the right look is for your overall board. Now for me personally, I would probably put a little grunge in there too, but I think that's too much for what you need to do for today, so I'm not going to make you do that. You will find that as I go into these, when I get to the perspective one, it's going to be like an hour-and-a-half lecture because I'm just going to keep adding stuff. But the point is that this is how you evolve these drawings. And this is how, if you have these basic steps, these basic skills, you can try it, decide if you like it or if you don't like it, and then move forward from there. Okay? So, again, give it a shot. Today is a free day to explore. You try these, you figure out what looks good, you delete, you edit, etc. When it gets time for your final version, the one that you're going to turn in to me as part of your assignment 106, assuming that you're going to do an elevation, obviously, then you're going to distill it down into what's the best looking one, what looks best for what I'm trying to show. Does that make sense? All right, I'm going to turn you guys loose. Let me know if you have questions.